Thank you for joining me during these live internet studies. My name is Ariel Ben Lyman Hanavi. These studies are broken up into two segments. If you've ever been to my website at www.tetzetorah.com, that's TETZETORAH.com, and you click on one of the links in the upper right corner on the homepage. One of them should say live internet studies, something like that. When you begin to click around, you'll notice that there are two segments. There's the hour-long segment, which is entitled Eschatology, a Biblical Study of End-Time Events, where we are reading and studying and talking about topics related right now to the rapture. So if you're interested in rapture topics, join us for the first segment of the live internet study. We're working our way really towards the book of Revelation. We're just taking it topic by topic. Like you can see on your screen, I know there's a little topical index, and we're in the part where it says topic 10, rapture views and overview. Then the second segment is 30 minutes long. It's apologetic in nature. It's really kind of a continuation of the older apologetic study that I did some time ago entitled Shema, exploring the Shema, discussions on the issues of Trinity, except this one is entitled A Trinitarian Response to Biblical Unitarianism. And in this study, the 30-minute study, we're looking at verses supplied by biblicalunitarian.com that, from their perspective, are definitively non-Trinitarian, although all of the verses are actually verses that Trinitarians have long historically held to be triadic, or verses that hint at or outright tell us about God and his triune nature. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, all three God, yet three persons. But Biblical Unitarian disagrees, and so we're comparing and contrasting their perspective on those passages with the Trinitarian, which is the position I hold. And currently we're in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. Okay, let's jump over to the rapture topic in eschatology. So we left off last week, again, we're in topic 10, rapture views, and overview. And we left off last week discussing the views of rapture. Of course, there are four kind of main views of rapture. I'm showing you a graphic on the screen right now with the charts that indicate the four main views. There's what's called the pre-tribulational rapture, pre-tribulation rapture, or pre-trib rapture. It goes by a few different names. I tend to just call it pre-trib. And this puts the rapture in relative proximity to what's called the 7-year tribulation. This puts the tribulation at the very beginning of this 7-year period that is identified as tribulation, or sometimes it's just called God's wrath. And by comparison, it puts the second coming at the far right side, the very end of the 7 years. We have another view that's popular today called mid-trib, and just like it sounds, it puts the tribulation right in the middle. And it cuts God's wrath in half, and it divides between what's known as tribulation in the first 3.5 years of the 7 years and God's wrath on the last half. It still has the second coming at the far right. Most of the charts do. I think every chart does, really. But it puts the rapture right in the middle of this 7-year slice. Then we've got a view that we've been kind of parked out on just for a few studies called post-trib rapture. Post-tribulationism has its rapture at the far right of the chart, nearly synonymous with the second coming. This particular view has a lot of kind of nuances to it from different people who hold to post-trib, people who've kind of rejected pre-trib and switched over. But a kind of a central feature of this is that the rapture is simply at the farthest right, which means Christians endure the entire 7-year tribulation and wrath. If you want to call them both the same thing. Second coming is at the far right, like most charts, and that's one of the main features of post-trib. It's right in the name, post-trib rapture. And then the last view that we're going to work our way towards eventually, which is the view that I hold to myself, is called pre-wrath rapture. The name itself is fairly new. I'll admit that. it is, it's only been around for 50 or 60 or 70 years or so, as far as I can tell. The father of pre-wrath rapture being Marvin Rosenthal, if I'm correct, or it might be Robert Van Kampen. There's debate on which one of them came up with the name first, but those two are big names in the pre-wrath camps. And where's the rapture fall in this view? Well, we still got the same 7-year slice, but now the rapture falls just a little farther to the closer to the end or farther to the right on any given chart. So it's not at the very left like a pre-trib. It's not in the middle like a mid-trib. It's not at the farthest right like a post-trib. It's kind of 3/4 of the way in. And again, this is an approximation for pre-wrathers. We admit we're not saying that it's exactly 3.5 year or at the middle of the 3.5. We really don't know. We're simply saying it's after the Great Tribulation, but before God's wrath or before the day of the Lord. So there are two events, which you might call bookends to God's wrath. Pre-wrath on the front end, second coming on the far end. So we'll get to that view in time. What we did last week is we looked at Pastor John Piper's perspective of this question, when is the rapture? And he decidedly takes what appears to be a post-trib perspective. We also recognized, or I keep mentioning that in my research, there are 5 good, solid Bible teachers. Let's see, I'll in the post-production, I'll flash their photos on the screen so you can see them. But if I remember them in the order that you're going to see them on the screen, from the left to right, there's Dr. Michael Brown, who's well-known Messianic apologist. And then there is Dr. Craig Keener. In fact, Dr. Brown and Dr. Keener authored a book together on why I don't believe in a pre-trib rapture or something to that effect. So it's a post-trib response to pre-trib theology. And so that, I believe, puts both of them in the post-trib camp. I'm quite certain Dr. Keener is. Now I'm drawing some doubts, but I'll go back and look that up either way. For now, I believe he is post-trib. Next to that, we have, or after that, I should say, we have Joel Richardson, who is a very well-known post-tribber. Although, in all fairness, his post-trib theology is what he describes as a hybrid between post-trib and pre-wrath, which I'll show you the chart here in a moment why that matters. So Joel Richardson, he's the author of the Islamic Antichrist and When a Jew Rules the World. He's got a lot of good resources that I am very supportive of, that I'm fond of, and that I think are very, very solid. Although, again, we disagree exactly on when the rapture is. And then the fourth gentleman's photo that shows up in my post production is Professor Douglas Moo. And he's a very well-established, very solid Bible exegete, but holds to the post-trib. And then lastly, we've got John Piper here. So that puts 5. Well, if you remember from last week, and go back and listen to the notes if you're not sure, 2 defining passages that cause John Piper to believe that it's a post-trib are the passages in Paul's letters to the Thessalonians. And there, Paul talks about how that there are 2 events that take place at the second coming of Jesus, but the events that are described are decidedly Armageddon-type sounding language. And when we look at any of those charts, so let me go back here again, going backwards now. If you look at the pre-wrath chart, the second coming is at the far right, which conveniently is also where Armageddon is. I suppose I could pull give me one of the charts. Armageddon shows up near the farthest right of any one of these given charts. In other words, near the end of the 70th week. Either at the end or 30 days after the end. Just like Daniel talked about, there are 30 days that extend beyond the 70th week, and then another 45 days that extend beyond the 30 days, totaling 75 total days that extend beyond the 70th week of Daniel. So Armageddon is over there, and that's where John Piper says the language that Paul uses in the Thessalonian letters the ones that that we looked at last week. That's why he holds largely to a pre or a post-trib position. Going back up to that post-trib position again, Armageddon would be on the far right of this chart. Same thing here. And same thing here. So the rapture itself moves around the chart, but the second coming stays fixed, as does the Battle of Armageddon for just about every other person who studies Scripture. So John Piper also noticed that there is a Greek word used to describe our meeting Christ in the air. This time I do have this pulled up. Classic rapture discussions include a number of Greek terms that show up in our English Bibles to describe either the movement of Christ towards us as he begins to appear in the air and then move towards planet Earth to rapture us, or touch down on planet Earth, depending on whether you're talking about a rapture discussion or a second coming discussion. But when we're talking about the general movement of Yeshua coming to meet us, the classic word that shows up is the English word coming, but can also be translated as presence or arrival or advent, second coming of Christ, things like that. Parousia is Strong's number 3952, like you can see on my screen. And a lot of Bible teachers make it a special emphasis to point out that this word shows up as a description of one event in the Bible, and John Piper talked about that as well in his discussion. There are not two comings of Christ like the pre-trib tries to kind of insinuate or try to suppose or imagine in his perspective using his word. Instead of two comings, there's only one coming hinted at throughout the entire Bible. It's the parousia, and that is the word that also conveniently carries with it a bit of this idea of people going out to meet whoever the significant person is that's arriving. Like if it's a king visiting a place, the people would go out to meet him like they did, like the people went out to meet Yeshua on Palm Sunday. So we've got parousia, that's one of the first words. Then another one of the words that shows up in our discussions on rapture. These are kind of overview terms that we're looking at right now. We're not diving deep into these real quick at this point, but I'm making you aware of them. And when the time comes, I can grab them and pick on them and kind of slow down and drill down into them if we need to. But harpazo is actually the Greek word, Strong's number 726. That is the origin word to our English word catch up or seize or snatch away, but the Latin version is rapire or rapira or something to that effect, and that's where we get our English word rapture. So a lot of people will start by telling you, well, the word rapture is not in the Bible. Big deal. Well, of course, it was written in English. The Bible wasn't written in English or even in Latin. So that's one of the silliest arguments I ever heard. In other words, it's nonsense to point out words that don't show up in the Bible or in certain places. Therefore, the Bible ostensibly can't be teaching those concepts because the corresponding English words don't show up. I'm laughing because it really is a laughable argument. It's used over and over in certain by people who think that it's advancing their argument in some way. The word Bible doesn't even show up in the Bible. Give me a break. Trinity doesn't show up in the Bible. People who try to say these types of arguments. Okay, so rapture doesn't show up in the Bible, but the word harpazo does, and we'll look at that in time. That is what? The snatching away, the seizing of someone and carrying them off for either a good or a bad reason. Episunago, from where we get our word synagogue, Strong's number 1996, is a word that shows up in Bible passages that talks about gathering us, where Yeshua says he'll send forth his angels, Matthew 24, around verse 31 or something around that. He'll send forth, or verse 30 and 31, he'll send forth his angels to gather his elect. This is the word that shows up when it talks about gathering. To collect, to gather, to assemble. Paul also uses a word that talks about gathering, and I believe it might be a different word that we'll see here in a moment. Paul talks about us meeting the Lord in the air in the Thessalonian passage. This is apantesis. Apantesis. And this word has been translated, Strong's number 529, has been translated as meeting or to meet. And this is the word that shows up only, I think, 2 or 3 times. Let me double check. Yeah, there we go. It shows up 3 times in the Bible, and it shows up once in Matthew, once in Acts, and then the Thessalonian passage, the famous we'll meet the Lord in the air that Paul uses. And what John Piper highlighted for us last week is that this Greek word apantesis is a technical term. It's used everywhere in the Bible, those 3 times. It's always used about people going out to meet someone important. Rather than that person having to come all the way to them, the people go out to meet this person. And this is kind of similar to the other one, parousia word, where this idea that Yeshua's presence is being felt. He's about to arrive where he needs to be, but then we go up to meet him in the air. This is the word that's used in those verses. There's another word that shows up that's similar to. Let me move these around because I want these two to be next to each other. The episunago word, where it's the gather together. Paul has a word, I believe this is in Paul's writings. Let me scroll down and look at the references real quick, and then I'll tell you. So there's one in Matthew, Luke, Romans, Corinthians. There's some Pauline usage, Corinthians, Thessalonians. Paul uses this word in 1 Thessalonians 1:10. Which is the word, the reference that I was talking about. He talks about that Yeshua is the one that rescues us or delivers us or draws us to himself. So it's similar in some ways to gathering and collecting us to gather together. It's also similar to the harpazo word. But what's nice about this word is it also has this very strong nuance of rescuing from danger. In other words, it definitely implies movement out of the sphere of danger rather than protection from within. There's another Greek word we'll look at for that. But this word itself has drawing to oneself, ruomai. And ruomai is Strong's number 4506. Paul uses it to comfort the Thessalonian believers and to affirm to them that Jesus is the one who rescues us from danger, from wrath, from destruction. And the eschatological implication being that not just rescuing us from the wrath of God itself, but also rescuing us. He has the ability to rescue us even from persecution if he wants to. But more often than not, as John Piper pointed out, God leaves us in place when it comes to persecution and just uses it as a vehicle to help us to build our endurance and trust and faith in God rather than taking us out of danger. But when the time comes, God has the ability to actually move us out of the way where the danger is. And this is one of those times I believe that Paul is using this word in that way. Contextually in the Thessalonian verse there. 3 more real quick, and then we'll jump into the study. These are kind of the technical notes that people need to kind of appreciate the study, that the location that the study is going. Strong's number 5, number 25, apantesis, which we already looked at, is the act of meeting. So this is us moving up into the air to meet the Lord in the air. This is the word that's used in many of those passages. And so shall we meet the Lord in the air. Paul uses it in his Thessalonian passage that we just looked at. Strong's number 5083, tereo. This word shows up in Revelation 3:10. It's a famous word that's coupled with the Greek word ek. So we have some combination of tereo, ek, the guarding from out of, or out from guarding, if you kind of trying to translate them kind of woodenly, guarding from within or guarding from without. Ek implies like location of movement out or from something. And the passage that is utilized by many in these discussions is that similar to some of the other words where there's protection or there's deliverance or there's salvation or something in context, the passage in Revelation 3:10 says that Yeshua promises one of those churches, because you have kept my word, a promise and of truth, etc., that I will keep you from the hour of testing. And if the context of the word hour of testing there is tribulation and or wrath of God, depending on which view of rapture you take, then we have Yeshua promising to keep us. But the force of this word is to guard even while in the midst of. It can be either that nuance to guard, or it can be to keep you from altogether. So it can go either way. It's got nuances that work either way. But important is that at least it allows for a discussion that doesn't remove Christians from earth during tribulation or even wrath. Rather, it shelters them in place, puts them in protective custody, kind of Goshen principle style, like what happened in the Exodus, where God didn't remove the children of Israel out of Egypt while the plagues were raining down. Instead, he sheltered them in place. He put a supernatural bubble around them, kind of like Wakanda's shield, keeping everything outside of Wakanda or something like that. I know that's a poor analogy. It just popped into my head. But God can do that, right? So that's teireo. And then the last word is apostasia. And apostasia, from where we get our word apostasy, is also the name of the book of the Bible at the farthest end, Revelation. That's where we get the word Revelation also. It's made up of two words. I'm sorry, not this word. What am I thinking? That's apocalypsis. Sorry, it's confusing. Strong's number 646, apostasia. This word is used by Paul in the Thessalonian letters to talk about the timing of the day of the Lord, and the fact that the day of the Lord is not going to happen unless two things happen first. One of them is what he calls the apostasia, and the other is the revealing of the man of lawlessness. And the man of lawlessness, of course, is the Antichrist. So Paul says the day of the Lord is not going to happen until the great apostasy and the man of lawlessness is revealed. Well, this word apostasia is translated either as defection or revolt or apostasy, but it can also be translated as departure. But the context demands, and it's not used very often. The word only shows up twice, and in both of those locations, I'm just going to scroll down and show them to you. In Acts, it's used to depart from Moses or forsake, meaning a spiritual departure, not to physically leave him, but to forsake Moses, to apostatize from Moses. That's the context of the passage there, and it's obviously a spiritual departure because by the time Acts was written, Moses was dead, so it wasn't any physical leaving Moses. It was actually a spiritual departure. So there's nothing physical about it.